Welcome back to the next lesson, guys, where we'll look at the tenant and their business. A commercial property's tenant is critical to the profitability of the investment. With leased investments, the property is sold with the tenant already in place. Having a solid tenant in place from the get-go lets you know exactly who you are dealing with. The goal should be to secure a tenant that will stabilize your investment. You want to avoid constantly cycling through different tenants, as this incurs more costs to you. Analysing the current tenant and their business will help to determine their viability as a long-term tenant. So let's start with the actual tenant. Tenant analysis. A big difference between residential and commercial is actually speaking with the tenant. For residential, you wouldn't call the tenant and ask them how they're doing, but with commercial, you definitely do. I highly encourage you to speak to the property's tenant to find out whatever you can from them. In saying that though, don't just call up every tenant of every property you look at. Once you've decided to pursue a property, try and speak with the tenant as soon as possible. However, this can be done once you're under contract, subject to due diligence. The point I'm trying to make is the agent cannot tell you to not contact the tenant. Be wary if an agent wants you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, which prevents you from speaking to the tenant. This could be because the owner does not want the tenant to know about the sale, or it could be unethical. With the help of the internet, you can also do online research on the tenant's business, especially retail properties, as there are enough websites and social media platforms such as Google and Facebook where they'll have ratings and reviews. This can help give you an impression of the business as well. It is important to drill into who the tenant is, because effectively the tenant will be your business partner over the life of the lease. Okay, so you're about to call the tenant, but what do you actually say? Here are some of the questions you can ask to help understand the tenant and their business. Have you been told the property is for sale? Is your business doing well? Have you considered buying the building yourself? This will also give you a good insight into their profitability and their plans for the future. Who owns the business? Would you sign a longer lease if I bought the property? This is also going to indicate the tenant's commitment and ensure them you're not going to be evicting them. Are you happy with the terms of the lease? At what times do you do most of your business? Are there any outstanding issues or maintenance? You'll actually find most tenants here are very honest and tell you the problems that they have. Do you see any future issues with your industry? What demographic of people usually come to the premises? How do most customers get to your premises? Is there enough parking? As you can see, this is an extensive list of questions and the conversation could be quite long. Some businesses will give you the time of day and others will only want to give you a quick chat. Just try to get as much information as possible as they will give you to get the inside goss on the property. It's best to inform the selling agent in advance that you intend to contact them. The agent will usually guide you to the appropriate person to speak to about the business, ensure that the owner is aware of the impending sale. Often a tenant can be worried that they'll be kicked out of the property when it's sold, so make sure you reassure them that you're an investor and want to have a good long-term relationship with them and the property. Now, depending on the tenant's industry, they may be required to have licenses and permits. For example, in the food and beverage industry, businesses require a permit to have equipment such as deep fryers, grease traps, and exhaust fans. The local council must approve their use and they should be cross-checked. A lease will usually outline the permitted use of the premises, so you should ensure that the tenant is allowed to do the activities required for their business, including providing all the goods and services they offer. In the lease, never guarantee the permitted use of the property. Make sure it's the tenant's responsibility to getting the correct approvals. Don't put that on yourself as the owner, as that's an added risk. Okay, let's move on to the business. Business analysis. As an investor, you'll often buy a tenanted commercial property. So effectively, you are buying into the tenant's business and its future. First, consider the nature of the business and its ability to generate revenue. Does it have a solid track record? Is it in a growth industry? Are there any potential disruptors on the horizon? Next, take a close look at the financials. How much revenue does the business generate? What are the expenses? Is it profitable? You need to understand the type of business they are operating. Let's look at some more questions that you should ask regarding the business. How busy is the business? What competition is there in the area? Is it growing? How long has the business been running? Ideally, you're looking for a tenant who's been in the property for more than 5 years, their business will be more established, and past the typical period of 3 years in which most businesses fail. A well-established business on a long lease is attractive. Who runs the business and how many staff are there? Be aware of businesses that are dependent on 1 or 2 people, as they could leave the business and it could fail. However, would a big national tenant moving to the area harm the business? For example, if you're buying a convenience store and a big Woolworths or Costco is moving in nearby, that's probably not the best for your business. Beyond the current status of the business, you'll need to consider the impact of rapid technological growth on the business. Technology has created but also destroyed many industries. Think video rental shops, for example, where these were completely wiped out by streaming services. The same applies to gaming stores and service-based businesses like computer repairs and electronic shops. Most of these have shut down as the price for new electronics is so cheap, so it's no longer economical to repair things, and branded companies are looking after their own servicing. This online shift means many retail stores are shutting and others are really struggling. Petrol stations may have a shorter future because of the increasing popularity of electric cars. The main question to ask is, next, we're going to be looking at reviewing the lease. Lease review. As a formal part of the due diligence into the tenant and business, it's advisable to have a solicitor review the lease from a legal standpoint. You should also check that the lease is registered with the council by requesting these documents from the selling agent. For the tenant, registering the lease ensures that the land title officially notes their interest in the land. If you're renting a property in Queensland and your lease lasts more than 3 years, it's important to register your lease agreement. If you fail to do so and the landlord decides to sell the property, a potential buyer might not be aware of the lease and may not be obligated to honour it. The new purchaser could evict the tenant despite having a lease. Registering the lease is mostly advantageous to the tenant to protect them. As a landlord, allowing a lease to be registered on the title is of no detriment and has little effect on you. Even if you have a copy of the lease, informal arrangements or under-the-table deals can be made between the owner and tenant. Inspecting at least 12 months of rental history is a good idea. The easiest way is to obtain a rental ledger from the property manager or selling agent, which shows the seller's actual income, when it was paid, and any late payments or rental concessions. Concessions, such as rent-free periods or rent reductions, aren't necessarily stipulated in the lease and can be hidden. Concessions are usually provided when a tenant is struggling financially or in return for the tenant carrying out renovations from which the owner will benefit as they add value to the property. Rent-free periods are quite common in commercial property, and we saw a large increase in concessions during the COVID pandemic. The most common issue I see in the lease review is the agents calculating their outgoings incorrectly. For instance, your tenants might be paying a fixed outgoing rate, whereas the actual real rates are a higher price than expected. If the rates are higher and the current owner has just been paying the difference, you could find a problem when you buy the property. For example, if the rates are $6,000 a year, but the tenant's been paying $4,000, then suddenly you're out of pocket for that difference. The lease will normally stipulate what the outgoings typically are and what portion the tenant pays. So this needs to be checked and verified through the rental ledgers and bank statements. Finally, if you are buying as part of a strata titled complex, you must also perform a body corporate review. A strata titled commercial property should have a body corporate set up, and obtaining the physical body corporate records is recommended. The report will point out any special or unusual levies, potential future expenditures, how much money is in the funds, etc. It will also detail the service contracts in effect, which can be a lot in a large complex. The body corporate is usually responsible for preparing these reports. The report costs typically between $300 to $1,000 and will go through the past 3 years' records to identify any issues with the property lot or common property. All right, that brings us to the end of how to analyse the tenant and their business. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you on the next lesson.